Today's daf is daf Ayin Gimel, and we're going to start V'im Isa, which is the third line down from the top. But just to, have a takeoff, a soft takeoff, we mentioned that Rav Dimi is of the opinion that just like the Kohen Gadol wears 8 begadim, so too a Kohen Mashiach Milchama also wears 8 begadim, and he derives that from a pasuk. The Gemara asks the following Tashvim Isa, if Rav Dimi is correct, and keep in mind that Rav Dimi said this when he came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. That fact will come to play in a few minutes. But if Rav Dimi is correct that Mashiach Milchama will serve in the Beis Hamikdash with the same Shmona Begadim that a Kohen Gadol wears, and that's for the entire year, then what are we going to do with the Brisa? The Brisa, which was quoted here on the top of the Amud, had derived a mute from the Pasuk that in the case of Mashiach Milchama, halacha is that he's not called, quote, Roy Lavo Li'ol Moed B'Yom Kippurim. And as a result, there's no halacha that his status and his position will be transferred and transmitted after his death to his children. There's no inheritance because he's not Roy Lavo El Moed. Now, Eino Roy Lavo El Moed means that he cannot do the avoda on Yom Kippurim. He's not a Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara asks Mechsei Chazi. Of course, he could be a Kohen Gadol, and certainly he can serve in the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippurim because, according to Rav Dimi, a Mashiach Milchama has the same status as Kohen Gadol. He serves with Shmona Begadim, and therefore he should be kosher. He should certainly be valid and qualified to serve in the Kodesh Kodashim. The Brisa says that he's not qualified to Ol Moed B'Yom Kippurim. Ol Moed meaning the Kodesh Kodashim. He's not a Kohen Gadol. Again, the subject of the Brisa is whether or not his status as the Kohen Mashiach Milchama will be transmitted through Yerusha to his children. But it all depends upon whether he's Roy Lavo Li'ol Moed. Can he serve on Yom Kippurim? And the Brisa says, no, he cannot serve on Yom Kippurim. Well, according to Rav Dimi, why not? He's wearing Shmona Begadim like any Kohen Gadol. Why can't he go into the Kodesh Kodashim and serve on Yom Kippurim? This is what the Brisa means to derive from that pasuk Shivas Yomim Yilbasham HaKohen Tachtov Mibonav Asher Yovel Al Moed L'Shois V'Kodesh Ol She'ikar Meshichaso Li'Oel Moed. If the original appointment, meaning the anointment of the Kohen Gadol, was for the purpose of serving as a Kohen Gadol, then we apply the pasuk of Yilbasham HaKohen Tachto Mibanav. Then it's transmitted over to his children after his death. Yotza Zeh, to exclude the Kohen Mashiach Milchama, even though he can't serve in the Ol Moed, but his Mashiach was not done for the sake of avoda. Ikar Mashichaso li Milchama. He was the Kohen Mashiach Milchama who would send the people out to battle. He was not designated as the Kohen Gadol for the purpose of avoda. And therefore, since Ikar, he doesn't have the status of Ikar Meshichas Li'ol Moed, meaning for the purpose of the avoda, therefore, there's no din of Yishamesh Banov Tachta. Basically, the Gemara asks now from a different brisa as an objection to Rav Dimi, Mashiach Milchama Eino Mishamesh Lo Barba Kikoin Hedov Lo B'Shmona Kikoin Gadol. The status of the Mashiach Milchama is such that he is excluded, no matter how you slice the cake, as we would say. He cannot serve in 4 begadim as a Kohen Hedov, nor can he serve with 8 begadim as a Kohen Gadol. He's what we call in Yiddish Nishtaher and Nishtahid, and he cannot serve in the Mikdash at all, period. And the Gemara thinks at this point that the Brisa is referring to a Dindo Raisa because the Brisa says he's not Meshamesh Bishmona Begodim. And that's against Rav Dimi, who says that on a Deraisa level, for sure, he's allowed to be Meshamesh Bishmona Begodim. Amalei Abaye. Abaye now basically throws the ball back into the court of the Makshan. And he says, I don't understand the premise of your kasha. You think that on a Deraisa level, he is excluded as a Kohen Mashuach Mulchama, both to serve as a Kohen Hedjot and as well to serve as a Kohen Gadol. How could you have such a Havamina? Elazar Mashrasle? Are you giving him the status of a non-Kohen? Imagine he's one of the highest people in Kahuna, and now you're telling me he's not a Kohen. He can't serve here, he can't serve there, not 4 Begodim as a Kohen Hedjot, not 8 Begodim as a Kohen Gadol. Ella, for sure, the Brisa admits that on a Deraisa level, as Rav Dimi said, he can serve with 8 Begodim as a Kohen Gadol. But on a D'Rabbanan level, they excluded him from serving as a Kohen Gadol. Why Mishum Eva? Because we don't want to incur the jealousy of the Kohen Gadol that there's another individual who's on the same level as him and has all the laws of a Kohen Gadol, and he can serve with Shmona Begodim. On the other hand, at least Chach let him serve as a Kohen Hedjot and 4 Begodim. I mean, really on a Deraisa level, if not for Eva, he would be serving as a Kohen Gadol. Let him serve as a Kohen Hedjot. And the answer is Kohen Hedjot, we cannot allow him to serve Mishum Shem Mailim B'Kodesh V'Lo Moridin. And that's a general universal principle that in any Davar of Kedusha, you could raise the level of Kedusha, but you cannot lower the level of Kedusha. And therefore, since the status of the Mashuach Mulchama on a Doraisa level is that he serves with 8 Begodim, we're not going to lower his Kedusha and have him serve with 4 Begodim. But where Abdimi said that a Mashuach Mulchama is Mashamish Shmona Begodim, that means on a Doraisa level. Now, here I want to mention a kasha that the Rishonim ask, and that is, Ma'naf Gemina. Is there any difference between what you're telling me that Minat Torah he could be Mishamish B'Shmona Begodim? I mean, once the Rabbana made that takana that he cannot be Mishamish B'Shmona Begodim Mishum Eva, so why did Rav Dimi feel compelled to clear the record and make sure that we understand the Doraisa Halach? It seemed so theoretical. And the answer is offered by the Siach Yitzchak. This is not theoretical. Why? Because in the event that the Kohen Gadol dies and they haven't yet appointed a replacement Kohen Gadol, then the Mashuach Mulchama, at least on a temporary basis, will serve with Shmona Begodim as the Kohen Gadol, because there's no Eva, the Kohen Gadol died. Amalei Rav Ada bar Ava l'Rava. The Gemara now is going to raise a kasha on the answer of Abaye from the Brisa. This Brisa is a very interesting Brisa that we're about to learn because it gives you like an overview of the laws of a Kohen Gadol. And from this Brisa, we're going to determine that there is no such thing as Eva, at least according to this Brisa. Hi Tana, the Tana of the Brisa that I'm about to quote, Lesle Eva. He certainly rejects this svara called Eva of jealousy. Belokam Shamish, and nevertheless, the Brisa maintains that the Mashiach Mulchama cannot serve in the Beis Hamikdash wearing Shmona Begodim as the Kohen Gadol against Rav Dimi. The Sanya, we learned in the Brisa Dvarim, Shebein Kohen Gadol and Kohen Hedjot. I'm going to give you now a list of the unique halachos that apply to a Kohen Gadol. Number 1, Par Kohen Moshiach Upar Abal Kol HaMitzvahs. A Kohen Gadol, if he makes a mistake and he hands down a ruling to be lenient in something which is very, very severe, it's Zdono Kores Shigoso Chatos, and then he went ahead and he implemented his ruling. It wasn't just theoretical. In Vayikra Daled, there's entire parsha about the carbon that a Kohen Gadol in that case has to bring which is called Par Kohen Moshiach. And a Kohen Hedjot, in that same situation, would bring what's called a Kizba or a Se'ira, which is the same identical carbon as any member of Klal Yisrael who sinned. And Par Yoma Kippurim, there's a special par that's brought by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. It's mechaper on for him and his bnei beso, and for his fellow Kohanim. And a regular Kohen Hedger could not bring the par of Yom Kippurim. Asir Seifa is called what's called chavitim, that a Kohen Gadol brings minchas chavitim twice daily. A Kohen Hedger would not bring a minchas chavitim vasir sa'ifa unless it was yom hischanich bo lavoda. Number two, Kohen Gadol lo parea. He's not allowed to grow his hair long in a case of avelus. And in the parsha of Kohen Gadol, that's what the Torah teaches us, that there's an issur to be parea. Kohen Hedjot is not prohibited from growing his hair long in a case of avelus. He's not allowed to go into the Beis HaMikdash in that state. He cannot do the avoda with Sa'aro Megudo, but he is not violating any issur by having his hair grow long. And furthermore, Kohen Gadol lo porem, he doesn't rip his garments if one of his close relatives died, and the mitzvah of kriya is suspended with regard to the Kohen Gadol, because the Torah says, "Ubegadav lo yifram." Aval porem hu milamaka, he is allowed to rip the bottom corners of his beged. In regard to a Kohen Hedjot, milamala, he's allowed, for the sake of avoda, to rip al meso korei mes milamala on the upper lip of the garment, like any other Jew. El oselo likanes lebeis hamikdash olavad avodik shebadim kruim. Next, the Kohen Gadol einav v'tami lekrovov, even in event that one of his 7 close relatives dies, like aviv, imo, echav, achiv, achoso, beno, bito, ishto, none of the above. He does not participate in their funeral. Next, the Kohen Gadol mitzuva ala basula. The Torah says, "Hu b'psulea yikach." He's got to marry a woman who's never been married before. Muzar al almana. He's not allowed to marry a woman who was married, even if her husband died and she never got a divorce, so she's not a grusha. In the case of a Kohen Hedjot, he's allowed to marry a Ba'ula and Almana. He's not allowed to marry a grusha. Kohen Gadol is machzir esarotseach. If a person killed b'shogeg and he goes to the miklat with the death of the Kohen Gadol, he's allowed to leave and free himself from the miklat and return to his city. And that's based on a pasuk at the end of Sefer Dvar, at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. It says, "V'yashav ba ad mos haKohen HaGadol." But if the Kohen Hedjot dies, that will not permit the Rotseach b'shogeg to leave the Ir Miklat. Umakriv onen, and a Kohen Gadol is allowed to be makriv karbanos even when one of his close relatives dies and hasn't been buried yet. A Kohen Hedjot, a regular Frankenfall Kohen Hedjot, is not allowed to be makriv any karbanos as an onen. Now, if the Kohen Gadol is makriv a karban as an onen, eno ochel, he's not allowed to eat from the kachim as an onen, and eno cholek, which will be clearer in just a minute, means he cannot get a portion in the kachim for achila because he's still an onen until the evening. And this is derived in the Gemara in Tzvachim Adaf Tzadi Tes from the pasuk V'Kohen Hamachateosa Yochlena, and the Gemara dashens Micha Roy Lachilas Kachim B'Shashe Krivus HaKarban Cholekbo. Aval Mishen Roy Oz Lachila Kagon Onen Eno Cholekbo. So he's not allowed to get a portion, even in the case of a carbon that can be eaten for another day. Let's say it was a shlomim. He cannot get a portion today and save it for tomorrow and eat it tomorrow because he doesn't have any right of chalukah as long as he's an onen, and it's not a person who's royal achilus kachim b'shah shehikra v'sakarma. Next, v'notel chelik barash. The Kohen Gadol can decide which piece of meat from the kachim he wants to eat, and he can bump away any other Kohen in the rank and file Kohenim. Kohen Hedjot cannot choose for himself which meat he wants to eat from the karban. The meat of the karban will be divided up equally amongst all the Kohenim in that mishmar. Furthermore, the Kohen who makriv chelik barash, the Kohen Gadol can decide which avoda he wants to do. He can in effect usurp the avoda from the Kohen Hedjot, who was chosen by the pious for that avoda, and that's his rights as Kohen Gadol. Unique status of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Hedjot depends upon the pious. Next, umeshamesh b'shmona kelim, and the Kohen Gadol wears 8 begadim, whereas the Kohen Hedjot only wears 4 begadim. The Kohen Gadol is patur al tumas migdash v'kadasha, and this is halacha that even though a tameh goes into the migdash or he eats kachim b'shkagi, he brings a karban ola v'yorev, and that's explicit in the Torah Vayikra Parakeh. The Kohen Gadol is patur from this karban, and the Mishnah in Horios and Daf Tes brings this in the name of Rab Shimon, and it's based on a pasuk that says in Bamidbar Yutes v'nichrasa nefesh ahi mitoch hakahal. And there's a very complicated drasha to prove that the Kohen Gadol does not bring a karban in this case. He's patur for tumas migdash v'kadashav. And kol ha'avodah shel Yom Kippur ve'en ksheros ela bo. None of the avodos in the migdash on the day of Yom Kippur can be implemented by anyone but the Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Hedjot cannot implement any of the avodos of the Kohen of Yom Kippur, the Kulon, and all these halachas that we mentioned. Now goes to Meruba Begadim. Now, in order to understand Meruba Begadim, we have to mention that at the time of Yoshio Melech, the Shemen HaMishcha was nignaz; it was hidden away, so there was no longer a possibility of being mechanech a Kohen Gadol through Meshicha b'Shemen HaMishcha. So the substitute for Meshicha b'Shemen HaMishcha to be Mechanech the Kohen Gadol was called Ribui Begadim. And as soon as the Kohen would wear the 8 Begadim as a Kohen Gadol would, he becomes sanctified and upgraded to the status of a Kohen Gadol. And all the halachas of a Kohen Gadol apply, even in the case of a Kohen Meruba Begadim, despite the fact that he did not have Meshicha b'Shemen HaMishcha, v'kulan, and all these halachos, these unique dinim that apply to the Kohen Gadol, no goes b'mashuach sha'ovar. What happens if a Kohen Gadol had a psul, a temporary psul, and they appointed a substitute Kohen Gadol, and that person got Mashicha, he was anointed as a Kohen Gadol, and now the first Kohen Gadol, his psul passed, and he goes back to serve as a Kohen Gadol again. And now the Mashuach Sha'avar, Avar means he was now removed from that position. He was only appointed as on a temporary basis. All the halachas apply to him, as if he were a Kohen Gadol. Chutz, mipar Yom Kippur Masir Sa'efa. There's a special exclusion that a Mashuach Sha'avar could not be makriv, neither the Par Yom Kippurim. That's called a Chova Kvua, and that's a Chova of Yom Kippurim. And then we have Asiris Ha'efa, which we said before is a special Karban Mincha that's brought daily. And in these two cases, the Torah says there could be only one makriv. The Torah goes out of its way to say par echad, asiris achas lechavitin, and not shnayim. So that the Mashuach Sha'avar, although he has all the identical dinim of a Kohen Gadol, Nevertheless, these two karbanos he cannot bring. The kulon and all these halachos ain't nogos b'mashuach milchama. He who is anointed as the Kohen Mashuach Milchama has only 5 halachas of a Kohen Gadol. Chutz michamisha dvarim hamurim b'parsha. There's a parsha in Vayikra Chaf Aleph that deals with the laws of the Kohen Gadol. And at the beginning of that parsha, it says, "V'Kohen HaGadol me'achav asher yitzak al rosho shemen hamishcha." And the extra words in that pasuk, "Asher yitzak al rosho," come as a ribui for Mashuach Milchama, who gets a Mashiach. He's appointed as a Kohen Gadol for the purpose of the mitzvah of Milchama. And in that parsha, we have 5 halachas of a Kohen Gadol, and they all apply to Asher Yitzak al Rosho, Shemen HaMishcha, even to a Kohen Mashiach Milchama. Other halachas do not apply. What are the 5 halachas mentioned in that parsha? Lo porei, lo porem, lo metami likrovov, umitzuva al abesula, umuzar al almana, umachzir es harotzeach kedivrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the dinim that apply to a Kohen Mashuach Milchama, and in that sense, he is identical to a Kohen Gadol, but other dinim that we saw listed here do not apply to a Kohen Mashuach Milchama. And Rabbi Yehuda in Masechet Makis has a special ribui in the Parsha of Yira Mikla to include even a Kohen Mashuach Milchama, that with his death, the Rotzeach B'Shogeg goes back home. He's freed from the Mikla. The Chachamim Omer, they disagree. Eino Machs. Now, from the fact that this brisa says Kulam Nogos B'Mashuach Sha'avar, meaning that Mashuach Sha'avar serves in the Beis HaMikdash with 8 Pagodim, exactly like the Kohen Gadol. Again, there are 2 karbanos that he cannot bring, but otherwise he is identical to the Kohen Gadol. The Tana obviously is not worried about Ava. We're going to have, even in the case of Mashuach Sha'avar, another second string Kohen Gadol is now serving as a Kohen Gadol. And then the brisa says, the very same brisa, that Mashuach Milchama is not Meshamesh B'Shmona Begadim, because it says Kulam Eina Nagos Milchama. So there are only 5 dinim, but not the 8 Begadim of a Kohen Gadol. So you cannot tell me that the reason why he's not wearing Shmona Begadim, as we suggested, Abai suggested to defend Rav Dimi, is because of Ava. This brisa doesn't hold from Ava. Haraya in Mashuach Sha'avar, he continues to serve as the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara answers no. In truth, as far as Torah law is concerned, the Mashuach Milchama could serve in Shmona Begadim, as Rav Dimi said. And when the brisa says he's not Meshamish, that's only Midrabanan Mishum Ava. But the Tana says that in the case of Mashuach Sha'avar, there's no Ava. Why? He lesle Ava bidikavase. Bizutre mine isle. In a case of a Kohen Gadol who has the same status as the Kohen Gadol himself, for example, Mashuach Sha'avar, he has the same status as Kohen Gadol. In fact, he already served as a Kohen Gadol. He did the avodah as a Kohen Gadol. So since he's equal on the same level as the Kohen Gadol is not going to be jealous of him. Jealousy is incurred by when someone feels that his position is being usurped by someone lower than him who doesn't deserve it. Someone who's bezutre minei is katan mimenu. For example, a Mashuach Milchama never ever served as a Kohen Gadol, and therefore there's a chashash of Ava if we allow the Kohen Mashuach Milchama to serve in Shmona Begadim, which the Torah itself would allow, and we're afraid of incurring the jealousy of the Kohen Gadol. Now, this opinion of Rav Dimi seems to be a transmission, as we said at the outset, of Rabbi Yochanan. He was the Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, and Rav Dimi would come to Bavel and he would transmit the Torah in the name of his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan. Yosef Rabbi Avo, the Karmelei La Shmaita, Rabbi Avo transmitted the Torah of Rav Dimi that a mature Cholchama can be Mishamish Mishmona Begonim, Mishmeder Rabbi Yochanan. And it was said explicitly in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And the other two Amoraim that was sitting there listening to Rabbi Avo's presentation, Ahadrinu, Rabbi Ami Rav Asi Lapai, they turned their faces around. They showed him their back, so to speak, as if to imply that Rabbi Yochanan never said such a thing. Ika Diami, according to a different tradition, it was Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Diamra. It was Rabbi Chia who said this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Vajrinu Rav Ami Rav Asi Bapayu. They turned around. Maskifla Rav Papa asks a question on the second Lishna. Bishleim Rabbi Avo. I would understand that if it was Rabbi Avo who was the one who was transmitting this halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, then Rabbi Avo commands a tremendous amount of respect. We'll explain why in a minute. And therefore, I understand why Rav Ami and Rav Asi did not explicitly disagree with him. They indicated with what we call body language that they weren't happy with what he said and they disagreed. But they wouldn't explicitly argue with him. Why? Rabbi Avo lived in Caesarea, and he was very makurov to the Caesar, to the Caesar, the Roman Caesar, who had a tremendous amount of respect for Rabbi Avo. It's a Gemara in Masechet Chagig on Daf Yud Dalid that Bebeis HaKaisar Hayimachabdim, the cover they gave to the Klal Yisrael was B'Shvil Rabbi Avo because of that admiration that they had for Rabbi Avo. In a sense, Rabbi Avo was carrying, the people of Israel on his shoulders vis-a-vis the Romans at that particular period of time. And therefore, they gave a tremendous amount of respect. The Jewish people gave respect to Rabbi Avo. Ella, but if you go with the second Lishna that was Rabbi Chia Bar Abba who said it, Memrule Memar, they should have, Rav Ami and Rav Asi should have explicitly said, Lo Omar Rabbi Yochanan, he never said such a thing. They didn't have to do it beremez by turning their backs. Now the Gemara presents another opinion, a dissenting opinion with regard to a Mashuach Milchama and his Bigdei Kuna. Ki also Ravin was the other outstanding Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan in Eretz Yisrael. He used to come to Bavel from time to time and transmit the Torah of his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan. Omar, he said that we never heard in our base medrash that a Mashuach Milchama could serve in the base of Mikdash B'Shmona B'Gadol like a Kohen Gadol. But what we did here was Nishal Itmar, that the Kohen Mashuach Milchama has a status of Nishal. Nishal means that when there was a major issue in Klal Yisrael, at that historical moment, they would turn to the Urim V'Tumim with a question, and the Mashuach Milchama could put on the Shmona Begodim like a Kohen Gadol with the ephod and the choshen with the Shem Hashem, and he could respond to the question that's being addressed to the Urim V'Tumim. But when he served in the Beis HaMikdash, he would only serve with 4 Begodim like a Kohen Hedjot. And therefore, that kasha that we had from a brisa of the kulam ena nogos b'mashuach milchama, that makes a lot of sense now. It's simple pshat. He did not serve in the Beis Hamikdash with 8 begodim. Tanya nami hachi. We have a brisa to support this transition of Ravin, and that is begodim shekohen gadol mishamish b'hem meshuach milchama nishal b'hem, which means that he didn't wear the 8 begodim unless there was a question for the Urim V'Tumim. Tana Rabbanan. Now, from here until the end of the perek, we're going to dedicate ourselves to the study of Urim V'Tumim. Ketzad Sholim. How do they ask a question to the Urim V'Tumim? Shoel, which is usually a melech, or it could be the Av Bezdin, or anyone that represents the entire tzibur, and there's a pressing need to get an answer, is Panav Klape Han-Nishal. He should face the Nishal, as we saw before. The Nishal is the Kohen who's going to activate the Urim V'Tumim get an answer to the question. Anishal Ponov Klapi Shechina. And the Kohen who's being asked this question has to look directly at the Shechina, which is the Urim V'Tumim, because as we said before, in the Choshen, there was the Shem HaMafarsh written on a cloth inside the Choshen. Hashoel Omer. It's not enough that the Shoel thinks a question, but rather he has to enunciate the question and verbalize it. And the Gemara is going to give, the Bryce is going to give an example from David. David asked the Urim V'Tumim. This was at the moment that Amalek, Nebuch, attacked a city in Israel called Saklag and took Shevi, the family of David and other women and children. And David asked the Urim V'Tumim, is now the time that we should go and battle against Amalek and free the Noshim and the Ketanim that were taken prisoners and captives by the Amalekim. And here's the way David formulated the question: Erdof achrei hagidud hazeh, should I go out to battle? Ha-erdof, it should say. And Vanishal Omer, and the answer given by, which was shown to this Kohen by the Urim V'Tumim, is Ko Amar Hashem alev hatzlech, go and defeat Amalek. You will be successful. You know, Mer, Ein tzarich lomar Ko Amar Hashem. Those three words are superfluous. Ela alev hatzlech. All you need is to convey the answer to the question. You don't have to quote God. Obviously, the answer is coming from the Shechina through the Urim V'Tumim. Ein sholim b'kol. You shouldn't raise your voice when you're asking the question. And that's going to be similar to Chana. When she davened in a whisper. Shenemar v'sha'al lo. Lo means that only the nishal will hear the question. No one else has to hear the question. V'lo mahara b'libo. And the questioner is not expecting that the nishal will have Ruach HaKodesh bel to read his mind, but rather he has to formulate it. Shenemar, as we saw in the case of David, v'sha'al lo b'mishpat ha'urim lifnei Hashem, and afterwards it says in the pasuk al piv yetzu, and all this means that the question has to be verbalized. Ella kederech sha'omra Chana b'tfilos. It should be in a low voice, like the case of Chana when she prayed. Shenemar v'Chana medaberes al liba, v'chak sfaseh nos v'kol lo yishma. You couldn't hear her voice. That's, by the way, why Eli HaKohen mistook her for a drunkard. Anyway, the Brisa continues. Ein sholim shnei dvarim kechad. You can't ask two questions at once. Im sholim, if you want to ask two questions, ein machzirin, the nishal who is activating and evoking the response of the Urim V'Tumim Ella Echad will only give one answer. And which question will the Urim V'Tumim answer? Machzirlo Ella Rishon. The first question will be answered, not the second question. Then Nemar, and again we go back to David in the story of the Urim V'Tumim. Now here we have a slightly different story. This is not Slaklag and Amalek. This is a city called Ke'ilah, Kuf Ayin Yud Lamed Hey. David was in that city and he heard that Shaul was going to go down to battle against this city in order that they should give up David. And David now asks the Urim V'Tumim, Hayaskiruni ba'alei Ke'ilah biyado hayered Shaul vayomer Hashem yered. So he asked two questions, and he only got an answer to one of these two questions. Just 1 second here. An important note here that I wanted to share with you. Having heard that Shaul was planning another attempt to capture him, David was undecided whether he should flee Ke'ilah, the city in which he was hiding, or to remain there. He inquired of the Urim V'Tumim, posing both questions, enumerated in the verse simultaneously. So he asked, number one, will the leaders of Keilah deliver me into his hand? And he asked the question whether or not Yered, just 1 second, Hayered Shaul, was Shaul indeed going to implement his plan to capture David at this point of Keilah? And Hashem's response through the Urim V'Tumim was Yered, meaning that Shaul is indeed going to come down to the city in order to capture David. So the Gemara says the following, that on the one hand, this is a very good example of two questions and you get only one answer. But the Bryce had pointed out that you get an answer to the first question. And here the first question that he asked is whether Yasgireni Bale Keila Biada. And instead he got an answer to the second question of Ha'ered. And Hashem said Yered. I'm sorry, not Ha'ered, but Hayered, my mistake. Okay. So now what we see is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave an answer to the second question of David, not to the first question. And we just said in the Bryce that Emech Zirin Ela Rishon. And the Gemara is going to give an answer here that starts with the words David Shal.